From the creators of Dark comes a new complex, mind-boggling mystery, 1899. It seems that Jantje Friese and Baran Odar have found their niche in confounding, multi-layered Netflix sci-fi mysteries with unusually simplistic titles. 1899 is bigger and arguably badder than Dark was, with a huge production and a $62 million budget that made it the most expensive German television series of all time. 1899 is a multi-lingual epic that follows a cast of diverse passengers as they try to make their way from London to New York aboard a gigantic steamship, the Kerberos. But, as is usually the case, things aren't exactly the way they seem, with the eerie situations arising and trouble abounding. Don't worry though, I won't be going over those situations in detail, and instead will analyze the show from a completely spoiler-free perspective. What immediately set 1899 apart from other shows for me was its incredibly varied cast of characters, and its commitment to representing those characters with utmost fidelity. This was the first multilingual show that I'd come across, so it was fascinating to me, and incredibly admirable that the showrunners committed to having their characters differ in nationalities and languages. Ultimately, this commitment on the creators' parts helped distinguish the show on more than just a meta level. Primarily, it served to do two things. First, having these characters come from different nationalities and speak such a wide variety of languages served to greatly distinguish them and set them apart. It made them much more identifiable to us as viewers, much realer. Each came from a distinct nationality and background, and that uniqueness also served to emphasize the vastly differing personalities that each had. The differences in personality are a vital part of 1899's story, as these characters' different traits and outlooks are what drive the story forward. The way our central protagonist, Mora, would react to something is different than, for instance, the Spanish priest Ramiro, and those distinctions in character cause the plot to branch off and deviate. They bring upon different events, actions, and circumstances, which are what keeps the mystery going. There is an obvious trajectory of events that exists outside of the characters' scopes, and that is happening regardless of their intervention. But that doesn't discard the fact that the things that set these characters apart and the way they react to the events going on adds multiple layers to the story. The second thing the show's commitment to being multilingual accomplishes is that it forces you to really focus on what is going on. That is, if you're watching the show with its original multiple languages and not instead purely dubbed. But yes, the show's original multilingual presentation inherently demands a focus that other shows do not. You have to constantly read subtitles to understand the various character interactions, which keeps your attention squarely on the show and immerses you deeper into it. You're kind of placed in a position to really absorb these character distinctions through their dialogue, because it feels like by reading that dialogue word for word, you gain a more intimate, concrete understanding of that character. The multilingual nature of the show is not the only thing that makes its characters pop. The characters are also carved out with disparate, sometimes contrasting backstories that we learn about as the show progresses. We get to see glimpses of the usually traumatizing events that drove these characters to board the Kerberos. This gives us effective insight into why the characters behave the way they do, and creates these expectations of how we think they will react. The cast of characters here is pretty big, so trying to sort through all of their backstories within the span of an 8-episode show is no easy feat. But in this as well, the showrunners do a good job of giving us just enough to get us invested. We don't see everything for everyone, there are still a lot of things that remain unknown to us, but this is for the good of the show. It's the perfect balance of information that doesn't risk overwhelming the viewer and hogging up the runtime of the entire show, but is enough to get us interested and to give us enough to note the contrast between the characters. This is one of the only shows in a long time that I finished while still remembering the names of all its central characters. And this is because of one simple thing that the writers did, which for some odd reason other shows are not doing anymore, and that is just saying the characters' names reasonably frequently. In the first 10 minutes of the show, we meet 8 of the main characters. Our protagonist Mora has her name repeated 3 times. Oleg, the Polish man working in the engine room, is called a Polak twice, which serves to at least drive home the association. Lucien is called by name twice, while his wife Clemence is not yet named, in addition to Ling Yi and her mother. Angel's name is repeated 3 times, Ramiro's none, and Mrs. Wilson's none as well. To me, that was the perfect amount of name repetition to really stick in my mind while not being so overused that it was overwhelming. We learned of a few character names and they stuck, while others we still do not know by name yet, so as not to overcrowd our memories so early on. It also helps that they were used seamlessly each time. It didn't really feel forced or like the names were just needlessly thrown in there, but rather natural. It's a very simple thing really, but very necessary when you have so many characters. I don't think shows like Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon do this enough, which is odd, given that they have dozens of characters. This is why I was particularly glad to see it here. So all in all, what we have are distinct, separate, identifiable characters with unique backstories and nationalities. They feel real, different, and three-dimensional, even from early on in the series. Additionally, they are memorable, with solid performances by the actors that serve to aid in highlighting their distinctions. Sadly though, despite the writer's successes in creating these identifiable characters, they ultimately end up failing to utilize them. Their backstories and nationalities seem to highlight highly different traits and mentalities, but the situations they are eventually put in seem to blend them all into one. The show rushes to unite its characters, and when that happens, too many of them seem to group off into individual hive minds. Gone are the distinctions that were set up so well. Instead, they are replaced with people who seem to only huddle together, mindlessly following around whoever the plot deems to put in charge for the time being. It's an incredible misuse of such a large number of characters, and honestly comes off like laziness on the writer's part. It feels like as soon as the characters have kind of grouped together, the writers breathe a collective sigh of relief and say, okay, now we don't have to think about what each of them will do individually, we'll just write them within the context of a group. And it's honestly very frustrating, because what was built up promises so much more from these characters, but all we end up getting are sparse, incredibly stereotypical character moments that highlight the most basic, common traits of each, while mimicking very overused character tropes. These characters can barely understand each other, but it never stops them from going on long, emotional, eye-opening, character-developing monologues where they pour out the deepest contents of their souls to veritable strangers who can barely understand a word they're saying. And sure, you can look at it like, yeah, these are strangers who don't understand them. That's exactly why they would share intimate thoughts with them. And that makes sense, at least to me to a degree, as I did think like that at first. But when it became so repetitive and commonplace that every character was doing it, it started to feel strange that all of these people share this desire to seek comfort by ranting to a stranger. I mean, yeah, a lot of people find solace in doing this in real life, but it just doesn't make sense to me for it to be this many people in the show. It instead takes away from their distinction and bundles them up discordantly. It's an even bigger offense when the listeners to these long monologues nod along or sometimes even seem to grasp meaning and offer answers to them. It's just weird and inconsistent. For most of the show, you'll feel like these characters barely have a way of communicating, but you'll watch them attempt to do so either way. At some point along the way, though, you're surprised to see that some of them, all of a sudden, do speak English because the plot now demands it. But then, in a following scene where knowledge of another language is crucial, they revert back to only knowing their original language. It's honestly lazy writing to me, and detracts greatly from the value of having such a different, multilingual group. There is no creativity at all in the way they communicate. Barely any attempts to mime or gesture or mimic something to get a point across, because when the plot wants a point to be understood by other characters, it is. And when the plot doesn't, the point is lost in the different languages. It doesn't help at all that the show seems to eventually stumble upon itself with its attempts to be vague and mysterious with its dialogue scenes. Characters often repeat different variations of, "Wow, what's going on?" or "What was that?" or "Did you hear that?" ad infinitum. And the times they're not doing that, they're having conversations with the longest, most exaggerated, most needlessly dramatic pauses I have ever seen. It gets to a point where it's no longer thrilling or suspenseful, but rather just boring, as you sit there waiting for another character to answer with what is ultimately just another generic line. 1899's characters are shown to be initially interesting and are built up as so, but end up being underutilized and herded along through a string of bizarre yet ultimately underwhelming events. It's a disappointing, scarcely developmental path to what were actually intriguing, well-built characters. But this strong setup and eventual disappointment in resolution is representative of the series as a whole. It has an interesting premise and decent technical execution, but it lacks for originality. Its concepts are heavily overused and overdone in other very well-known pieces of media which did it much better, but that I won't mention for spoiler reasons. 1899 doesn't bring enough to the table to distinguish itself from its sources of inspiration, but rather seems to be an oversimplified representation of their core concepts, covered in a vague, needlessly complex shell. It grabbed me in its beginning, but lost me the more it went on, in a conclusion that was ultimately underwhelming. The showrunners have come out and said that they have plans for a second and third season, and that this first season is an Act 1 of sorts, set up for what is to come. For that reason, there may be hope for a better future that may perhaps draw me back in later. But for now, what we did have did not leave any lasting impressions. But anyways, if you're still watching, I'd like to sincerely thank you from the bottom of my heart. It truly means a lot to me that you gave me some of your time, and please let me know what you thought of 1899 in the comments below. I'd really like to hear it. And I'll be answering every single comment. Try to keep them spoiler free though, or at least use spoiler warnings so that we don't ruin the excitement for those who are still watching it. I'd also like to give special thanks to one of the channel's viewers, Stay, or Ste? I don't know, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. They pointed me towards 1899 when I actually hadn't heard about it at all. I really appreciate that. If anyone else has any suggestions for things you'd like me to talk about, point me to them and I'll try my best to cover them if they're sufficiently interesting. December is going to be packed with interesting movies and series, so there'll already be a lot for me to cover there, if I can find the time. But anyways, thanks again for watching. If you'd like to see some more video essays, reviews, and the like, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate you all. Take care, and I'll hopefully see you soon. Goodbye.